uh, I have been feeling rattled today coming up to the appointed hour to do my Friday afternoon presentation. This presentation is being made in the week in which the election of the President of the United States and various down ballot candidates are being played out in our nation. And I have been very moved and upset by the experience we're all sharing living through this. So I'm going to take at least a small detour away from what I had planned to talk about, just to comment on what's happening in the nation and why it is that I'm unable to just dive into what I ordinarily would have. I feel that this is a very portentous time, and it's very painful to live through it. I am appalled that we live in a time of terrible tribalism. There seems to be two tribes in the United States. They're almost equal in size, and they do not share a common reality. They do not share a common set of beliefs. They don't have a common point of view on which way the country needs to evolve, and there is a tense, unpleasant, and hate-filled stasis and tension between the two opposing camps, and that was very disappointing. I had thought, based upon prognostications that were bounded everywhere, that the country would pull back from where it had been with Trump and start a very strong move in another direction. And a new president would come with a big mandate of a large number of votes buffer between him and Donald Trump, and that the Senate and House would be unified by one party, and a lot of work moving in new directions would be able to start. And that's not going to be the case. We're going to have a divided government again, and there's going to be stasis on doing much that's going to forward changes in the quality of life for the American public. And I, I'm I'm taking some comfort from the fact that we will have a different president with a different style of doing things. And there are two of the three things that need to happen that would make life better, I think, in the world that he can do, even if he has a Congress that won't let him do much about domestic affairs. He can certainly take on a different civil and more engaged voice in conversations with the other nations of the world. And he can start negotiating a reinstatement of some treaties, the building of different treaties that don't exist until now. He has a much freer hand to carry on foreign relations than he does to get domestic programs done, simply by virtue of his job description. And as the chief employer in the executive branch of government, he can overhaul all the branches of the executive branch. He can make us a new justice department. He can make us a new health department. He can appoint new heads for those programs and get people who are competent and who follow facts and science and who are committed to the well-being of the populace and not to being a sycophant in somebody else's party or one who's lining his or her pocket but through virtue of the job that they're doing. So I feel cheerful and optimistic about that too, even though I'm disappointed. And I will end by end this part at least by just observing that I have never been through a time like this over my almost 90 years of life on the planet. I've been through terrible crises. I was born in the teeth of the Great Depression. I lived through World War II when we weren't sure that fascism wasn't going to take over the world. And I've lived through other wars and then the crash of 2008 since then. Never, never, never has it felt like we've been this deeply divided and this embittered with each other. People are actually full of hatred and willing to go wrangle with each other in the streets or even kill each other as a possibility. It's terrible. During the Depression, there was a lot of anti Semitism, there was a lot of anti immigrant feeling, But on the other hand, there was a lot of human kindness. People were kind to people who were out of work. People would feed them. People would buy pencils from beggars in the street so the beggars could go home and feed their families. And the government put great social programs in place. The Works Project Administration and the CCC created the national parks, created the housing in the national parks, built the roads that went into the national parks, helped build highways, helped decorate post offices with murals, helped hold public showings of plays and of the arts. Support was given to making life better for everyone, and it was creative and it was welcome and it kept us humming in many ways. And when the war came, we were united like at no other time in my memory. We had a common enemy, and old animosities were put to the side. The government was composed of members of both parties. We built bridges across the divides that had separated us. And that didn't come apart until the Vietnamese War, when we started to be torn apart again by different versions of what the government should be and what kind of nation we were. It was a time of great ferment, but not near, and divisiveness, but not nearly as much as there is now. I think as a social scientist, what we're witnessing is a battle to the death between the forces of the past fighting to try and keep alive structures in the culture that once defined the culture. Male patriarchy, second class citizenship for immigrants, uh, 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 anger at other races, scapegoating other races. These were things that were part of the structure and fabric of the society that everybody accepted. We struggled against it some. We were trying to move forward, but it was the order of things. And there's a great nostalgia in the land now on the part of many people to be able to return to that period of time in history. I believe that the forces of the future will prevail eventually. I believe that the younger generation is not characterized by commitments to the ways things were in the 1950s and before the 1950s, 60s dislocation started. They're more kind, they're more liberal, they're more inclusive. Uh, they don't need to stigmatize people who are different than they are or to punish them. And those of us who are older will die off, and I believe we will continue to move out of darkness and towards the light, but we're in a temporary stasis at this period in history. And it's very painful for me to see and to be caught up in. I wish I could fix it, but of course I can't. And all of that seems much more important than any petty self indulgence I was going to do for myself today. Nevertheless, this is my chapter and my time to talk. So I found a way to bridge my being moved by the darkness of the life we're in right now and to still bear witness to what I'd promised to do. I'd promised to return to two topics, the creation of step families today, and I was going to pick up another theme, my struggling still to find my voice and my style with my clients who are coming to me in the first decade or decade and a half of my practice. So I think I will leave the first one of those go for today. I'll still put it on the agenda for tomorrow, for next week, tomorrow. I wish it was next Friday already. Maybe things would calm down some. But I will talk about my practice because the case I was going to talk about, one that felt terribly significant to me as the time at the time I was working with it, and again significant to me today because of what we're living through, is a beautiful example of myself and my client moving out of a kind of ugly darkness and toward the possibilities of life and renewal. So that's the case I'm going to share with you. It feels very apt for the day we're spending today, this Friday. It's a chapter from my book that I can read, and the title of the chapter is called Inexplicable Love. And it's funny, when I wrote this about 3 years ago, and the beginnings of it are very relevant today. The challenges I've encountered as I've traversed the path of my life have ground on me, burnished me, and somehow, as a byproduct, have moved me to free myself from most of the templates of bigotry we're all encouraged to embrace. Whatever are the belief systems of that particular culture in which each of us has been raised, those systems inevitably inculcate forms of discrimination and bigotry that we're expected to embrace. Such indoctrination into the meaning and purposes of our lives and the related values to be pursued and what kinds of others are to be scorned, stigmatized, or even brutalized is carried out by all cultures. During the onflowing decades of our development, we're expected to learn and to internalize the quote proper unquote ways of thinking about and quote understanding unquote our lives, our relationships with others who are members of our reference groups, and how we are to relate to all the others who are quote outsiders close quotes of one sort or another. I long ago rebelled against many of the lessons I was expected to learn. Now it has come to matter a lot to me that I've become reasonably understanding, accepting, open, and even appreciative of differences in the life patterns, beliefs, and behaviors exhibited by those who populate our planet. My fellow human beings embody such a rich array of races, religions, ethnicities, and national characters. I have additionally broken many of my own culture's quote rules of conduct, close quotes, that I have been taught. I have divested myself of a plethora of beliefs I was expected to honor, beliefs that came to seem to me to be stupid, anti human, contrary to science, or even harmful for living a sustaining life. I have also shed my conviction that the manner in which I presently live my own particular life and the commitments I endeavor to exemplify with my daily conduct of that life are those that should be embraced by everyone. I am now convinced that how I strive to conduct myself may in fact be good for no one but myself, and it may not even be good for me, for I remain a work in progress. So, quite some time ago, I also stopped trying to support any assumption that there was a quote correct unquote way to live. But unfortunately, as do all humans, I still suffer from a stubborn and lingering residual array of biased assumptions about the quote true nature close quotes of some kinds of other humans I may encounter. Yet, as is all too common for every one of us, and in the face of my longing to be culture free, I can still fall into the error of assuming that certain recurring characteristics of some groups of humans I have been taught to quote see unquote is universally shared by all who are members of the particular group in question. I then make a preformed assumption that the representative person in front of me must therefore possess the entire array of those stereotypical characteristics in abundance. For example, on rare occasions when my career has led me to interact with some male law enforcement officer, I have collapsed into almost reflex like presuppositions that the man with whom I am relating must, of course, be misogynistic, rigid, prone to alcoholism, a homophobe, politically conservative, subject to episodes of rage, the bearer of paranoid suspiciousness that all the rest of us were scumbags, and certainly racially bigoted. But Will walked into my life in the early 1970s, and my interactions with him helped me to work myself through and out of that particular residual pocket of chauvinism in my own psyche. My new client had come to his first appointment with me immediately after having left work for the day. He was a sheriff's deputy, so he entered my presence in full regalia, his neatly pressed and creased khaki sheriff's uniform, well polished black shoes, a badge, and a holstered pistol. The man who seated himself opposite me was a large, muscular, imposing figure, probably about 6 feet 4 inches in height, and weighing what I would have guessed would have been about 210 pounds. At first, I could not fathom what strange set of forces had sent Will my way, For addition to the quote conventional unquote characteristics I knew above and enumerate, I also quote knew unquote that law enforcement personnel were not possessed of a great deal of psychological mindedness and would have minimal willingness to seek counseling the better to manage their lives. But show up Will did, so it was time for me to find out about him and to see if I could help make some kind of difference in his life. I didn't have to wait long to hear about Will's distress. Doc, I don't think I can stand my job anymore, he said softly, with quite a pained look on his face. Of course, I followed his opening lead and asked my client to tell me what was so distressing about the work he did. And also, of course, I expected to hear about dangers, shootouts, car chases, intense episode of terror, or Lord knows what other horrors. As I listen to a client's story, too often I get into trouble by assuming I already know where their description of some experience is headed. Yet, with a distressing frequency, I soon discover that my immediate prediction of what I'm going to hear is way off base and that I may not know anything whatsoever. And on far too many occasions, I fall into the same error with my poor wife, who desperately struggles to say aloud a description of some experience she wants to share with me while I am talking over her, finishing some of her sentences for her, and completing them for others for her completely and incorrectly. So, no, I was not about to hear stories of atrocities inflicted on Will by the duties of my client's work life. But instead, I soon heard a description about the unspeakable horrors inflicted on Will by his own internal life. You see, my client was assigned to the booking department of the Los Angeles County Jail. He was the sergeant supervising the work he and others had to do when deputies working in the field brought an arrestee to the jail. A record had to be opened, and mugshots and fingerprints taken, and decisions needed to be made about in which of the several holding cells the detainee should be incarcerated. Will had managed to see to it that the process almost was done quickly and efficiently. For the most part, Will found those who had been dragged before him to receive his services to be pitiable. So many arrived staggering from alcoholism or drugs. But yes, some thugs and gangbangers were hauled in who were surly and hateful. He also found the bookings of those accused of domestic violence or of child abuse quite unsettling. But none of this, on first hearing, sounded to me like an unbearable set of challenges. Instead, all I was focused upon initially was that Will's job assignment safely sequestered him from the violent and dangerous confrontations often inflicted on his colleagues in the field. By degrees, my new client finally got to the heart of the matter of his distress. When Will showed up in my office, at that period in Southern California's history, the Los Angeles County Sheriff had been pursuing a much publicized crusade to crack down on male homosexual encounters in public places. Undercover agents were going into certain areas in county parks at night, into bathhouses, into gay bars, and onto certain street corners known to be gay hangouts and hookup places. And in a way that was often an entrapment, they began to arrest a large and growing number of homosexual males. And what was troubling Will the most was the treatment meted out to gay men who had been taken into custody by arresting officers and upon arrival at county jail, even by some members of Will's own booking staff. By the time the alleged criminals had been brought to jail, they were often bloodied, brutalized by arresting officers, and beaten with fists and clubs to the accompaniment of curses and many shrieked words reviling and condemning the prisoners as loathsome creatures who were a plague upon life on earth itself. But the hateful and terrorizing treatment of the gay men did not end with their arrival at Will's domain. Will would watch helplessly as his staff would curse, kick, and spit upon those now in their custody. They would frequently knock them to the ground and drag them helplessly to their placement in cells. It was a joke in the unit that the queers were to be incarcerated with the most violent hoodlums who were then likely to continue the brutalizing punishment from inside the holding cells when no one was looking. So my client was now spending a significant segment of his work life in an overflowing cauldron of raging homophobia run amok. For a time after the war on gayness had begun, Will had tried to call upon his deputies to remain professional, treating gay arrestees no differently than any of the others. However, my client soon learned not to try to stem the tide of hatred with much vigor. He grew afraid that if he protested the ill treatment of gay men too sharply, he would lose credibility with his crew as their supervisor, and they would start to rebel against him, gossip about him, and accuse him behind his back of being a homosexual himself. Of course, I was not an idiot. I began to suspect that Will was, in fact, a gay man, but did not give voice to my supposition for some time. I felt I had to grow Will's trust before there would be an opportunity to discuss with him what was then such a taboo subject. As we began to know each other, I learned that Will had been abandoned by his father at an early age, around 6. The man had left his wife and children abruptly and simply run off to another city, ditching his parental role entirely, never paying any support, and not visiting his 2 children. Will had an older brother. As is so sadly the case for many of us, Will then attempted to master the trauma of father loss by acting to give away to others that for which he still so intensely longed. For example, the Sheriff's Department had a very comprehensive set of community outreach services, including a variety of programs for youth. And Will spent most of his free weekends supervising outings for males who were preteens, taking them to sporting events, teaching them crafts, and leading them on wilderness adventures, playing out for them in a surrogate role, the caring father for whom he had always longed. The male youth adored him. Most of them had either absent, detached, or abusive fathers, and Will often became quite involved with his charges, going to the homes of one or another of them when there was some tense family problem unfolding and doing the best he could to try to calm everyone down. Will lived alone. His biggest obsession was the Datsun 240Z sports car he had recently purchased for himself. He hand washed it every weekend. He kept it immaculate. He cleaned its crevices with Q-tips. He vacuumed it daily. He polished and waxed it every month. Will had no close friends. My client did not go out socially with some of his colleagues on occasion. Oh, did go out socially with some of his colleagues on occasion, but did not like what he called their BS, their conservative politics, their misogyny, and their anti intellectualism. He himself was currently going to community college in his spare time to get an MA in criminology. So he mainly kept to himself and worked on his class assignments when his work duties provided time. His needs to maintain himself and his apartment and his community activities took up almost all his discretionary time. The person in his life to whom he was the closest, no surprise, was his mother. He had become the quote parentified child, close quote, at an early age, feeling that it was somehow up to him to mitigate the troubles inflicted on the members of the family by his dad's flight, and in particular soothing his mother in the face of her distress. When I met him, he was contributing some portion of his earnings every month to her to allow her to have a better quality of life than she was able to provide for herself. And he was often engaged as well in a variety of practical ways to be of help to her, running errands, fixing things in her apartment, and giving her company when she was lonely. His brother had married, and Will was also very involved being a good uncle to the niece and nephew that his brother had fathered. He was always available to his sister in law in a pinch when the family needed some babysitting or had some errand to run. He would make himself available to listen to either brother or sister in law when there were family spats, and neither might be happy for a time with the other. Will would comfort them and try to give them some practical advice could talk them down out of their distress. Slowly, Will came to trust me and became willing to share with me deeper and more anguishing struggles of himself. In his third visit, he choked out the following confession, quote, I think I'm gay, but I don't want to be gay. I fought myself over and over again. And now I've succeeded in closing myself up completely. I've never done anything sexual with anyone, not any grown man, nor any of the boys I've met through my extracurricular activity. God knows I've daydreamed about it. But when I have those daydreams, I hate myself and I force myself to think about something else. I've never dated a woman nor tried to have sex with one either. I kept to myself all during high school and college. I'm still doing it in grad school. If anyone approaches me, I'm rude, but I know how to be distant and not give the person any reason to continue our interactions. Close quotes. I answered, quote, so where's your sexuality gone? I understand about your wanting to contain and to refrain from behaviors you abhor, not to engage yourself with others in that way, and then having to live with the self-loathing you'd experience if you'd enacted any of those images and actually did anything. But you're still young and vital. Sexual urges can drive us so powerfully. Do you have any sexual life at all? Do you even grant yourself the right to masturbate? Sometimes I can't control myself and I jack off. And do you surrender and let yourself come when you do? Yes. And what stories or daydreams are you telling yourself that help you get fully aroused and allow you to release yourself when you find yourself giving in to urges you detest? Will started crying. I hate myself and I hate my life. There are times I just want to die. I did the most shameful things a few years ago. I thought I'd pass out from terror, but I went into an adult sex shop and I bought a dildo. That's what I use. I take off all my clothes and get naked. I get the dildo from where I've hidden it in my sock drawer. I go into a closet in my bedroom, close the door, and turn off the light so I'm standing naked in total darkness. I stand up straight. I put the dildo in my mouth and I start sucking hard on it. I rub my dick. I imagine the dildo as a cock of one of my boys. In the daydream, the boy's unhappy. He has some kind of problem. I want to comfort him. So I tell him to get naked and let me give him pleasure. He should just relax and surrender. In the story I'm telling myself, I imagine him giving in to me and the good feelings I'm given to him. I get so excited as I imagine him getting really excited. I think about him starting to come, and then I do. Will sobbed uncontrollably for some moments. I hate myself when I get weak and do that. It's disgusting. When I'm done, I have to take a shower and I try to wash myself clean again. I have a very scratchy loofah in my shower. I use it to rub myself hard all over. I do it again and again until it hurts and parts of my skin are stinging and raw and red. Will's anguish outcries left me in a frozen silence. I was so aware that I was not Will. I thought about the challenges in the world so differently than did he. I didn't find his actions loathsome. No, I found them almost unbearably tragic. Worst of all, I was in the thrall of an empathic bridge that had strung up between us. All I could experience within myself as I listened to his tormented confession was something he was not acknowledging in the words he was saying to me. Standing in the bleak darkness of his closet, rubbing himself and sucking on a sex toy felt to me like just about the loneliest thing I had ever heard in my life. As I kept him company in his anguished disclosure, it was as if a glacial wind and absolute darkness were playing through my soul. I shuddered as I listened. I thought to myself that his perceived enormity of the quote crime close quote of his nature had resulted in his exiling himself to the most frigid and terrible solitary confinement in the Siberian gulag of his inner life. What then followed in the aftermath of Will's disclosure of his anguish was a turn toward a set of conversations about the possibility of his career. I wound up giving Will a fairly long analysis of his dilemma, as I understood it, and a review of the possible courses of action. You say you don't know if you can continue with your career. I can understand how unbearable it must be for you there, knowing about your secret self while you witness such an outpouring of hatred and brutality directed to those whom you believe you might as well be. So here's what my profession has taught me. When any of us are trapped in a place of life, a place whose requirements are at horrible cross purposes with significant parts of who we are as a person, a place demands that we violate ourselves over and over again. Something has to give. If we can find some way to break free, we may either go crazy or commit suicide. There are only three possible ways for any of us to move forward and to escape one or another of those disasters. One possibility is that the self be altered to bring it into conformity with and reduce the tensions between that self and the demands cascading in on it. But if that self transformation is not desired or is not possible, then the dissonance being inflicted on us by the setting has to be courageously opposed. The self has to protest and to struggle to transform the beliefs of the system. We have to fight and rebel so that the setting is challenged to alter, no longer has the same characteristics, and no longer inflicts the same harshness on ourselves. But if neither of these possibilities is viable, leave taking from the setting must happen. The self has to move on and embed itself in the world in a place where there is no longer terrible dissonance between the demands of the new setting and the contours of one's nature. So I think you're right. Staying in the sheriff's department is causing you almost unbearable misery. What should our work be together then? If you've been able to grasp what I've just said to you, it might be possible that I could help you embrace an identity as a gay man without the terrible internal horrible shame and guilt you've experienced for so many years. If we could achieve that, then you could even go public at the sheriff's department, announce your secret to your fellow deputies, and fight courageously against your department's sub rosa encouragement of the brutalizing of gay men. Do you want to begin that journey? Do you have the will and staying power to affirm who you are, to rebel against the culture of the department, and to bear the horrible abuse that will be sent your way? I need to tell you that I'm not asking you to be such a hero. So if you don't have the will to begin such a battle, you could quietly begin to think about some other career and get ready to give up your position in the sheriff's department instead. The first of these possible ways forward, being openly gay and publicly fighting the homophobia of the department, seems so unlikely a project as I listened to you. It would be very hard for me to convince you that you could be both gay and lovable. It would certainly be almost impossible for you to go out in the open and convince your fellow deputies that gay men are worthy of every kindness, respect, and decency, and that you yourself should be treated with respect. So, helping you to find some way to enable you to find other work to support yourself seems to me to be the most reasonable way to reduce your distress. Of course, any new career would have to be one that could provide you a living and one in which your interactions with others, your sexual struggles, and others' bigotry about gayness or lack thereof would be irrelevant to carrying out of your daily tasks. Change is always hard, but I'm certain some such transformation that would be within your reach could reasonably be found. Will spent several more sessions educating me why it had been so important to him to build a career in the sheriff's department and why it was going to be hard to consider leaving the career path he was following. He focused mainly on having an uncle, his mother's brother, who had been a policeman. He had liked his uncle so much and had often longed for the man to invite him to do things together more frequently. Each time was a treat. But his uncle, of course, was tied up with his career, with his own wife and children, and he lived some 40 miles away from where Will had been growing up. So this had limited possibility for shared time between them. In addition to the man's periodic kindness, his uncle was special in another way. Will always felt his own father to be such a morally reprehensible person that it gave him some kind of comfort to have an uncle who was different from his father. The policeman uncle was a person who stood for honoring the law and upholding moral obligations and spent a lifetime exemplifying and enforcing those in a fair and balanced manner. It took me more than a year to feel ready to touch upon the third thread of the importance to Will of being a sheriff. That chosen a career, of course, served Will as a public disguise. While pursuing it, he could wrap himself in the machismo trappings of his uniform, his gun, and his badge, and the symbolism of masculinity and power these conveyed on him. And he could hide from both public view and from his own view his unbearable and unacceptable longings to be a small boy and to be loved by a caring father, even loved sexually. So, what was Will to do if he were to resign his present post? It was one he had worked long and hard to achieve. So, we spent some time reviewing my client's boyhood occupational fantasies, his leisure time pursuits, his potential interests and other possibilities, and contacts he might have that might possibly provide entry to something different. In the course of his meanderings, he remembered an older deputy who had taken a liking to Will early in Will's career and had decided a couple of years back to take early retirement. The man wanted out of the department, had enrolled in night school and real estate courses, and had become a realtor. As the man was leaving his post and saying goodbye to his colleagues, he had told Will himself should consider doing the same thing. And if Will did so, the older colleague who intended to become a real estate broker would certainly give Will a place to hang his shingle, should Will ever contemplate the necessary training. My client had not given the offer much thought at the time it had been made some years back, but then a few months after the older colleague had retired, Will's brother had called and said that the brother and his family were doing better financially and was thinking of buying a home. They wanted to get one with a small guest house or attached apartment so that Will's mother might have an easier life in residence with them and under their wing. What did Will think? Will was very pleased with the suggestion, made his relatives a gift of a few $1,000s to help him finance the purchase, and in his efforts to help his brother and sister in law to understand their challenges, he then found himself going with them to open houses, meeting realtors, thinking about making bids, reading offers and mortgage applications, and of course, reading escrow documents. He found the process quite interesting, and his brother and sister leaned on his good sense a great deal. But again, the experience did not lead to anything quite yet, unless, at least until we reviewed what had happened together. After hearing these memories, I suggested to Will that entry into life in real estate might be a good one and could provide him a meaningful path out of his law enforcement career. I knew his community college semester was coming into an end in a few weeks. When the next semester started, would he consider suspending his progress towards his master's in criminal justice for at least a little time and instead go to real estate school? As far as I knew, he could get a certificate of completion and sit for the state licensing examination after the completion of only a few number of weeks' study in the evenings and on weekends. I tried to be eloquent and practical. I told my client he certainly would not be doing any damage to himself and not be wasting his time, even if we get the credential and then decide not to enter the line of work. At worst, there would probably be a day coming in his own future when he too might be seeking to buy some home, and he could manage the process better, even save on commissions that he would have to pay if he himself also had a license. Will agreed to carry out the experiment, and I was lucky. Just as he enjoyed being helpful to his brother and sister in law, so he was enjoying the studying he was doing. He sailed through the real estate course with a burst of energy and passed the state exam on his first try. And while he was enrolled, he recontacted his former colleague, who was once again reassuring and telling him that he could have a place and a desk in a firm when he was ready to start selling homes. And he was really happy that Will had reached out to him and had asked him for help. The time of transition in his occupational identity was a difficult one for Will. As do most newcomers to the real estate profession, Will was working many evenings and weekends hours trying to get listing, trying to get buyers, doing a lot of cold calling and running on empty, fatigued and uncertain. During the day, he had to remain in his usual position in the jail. It was clear it would be many, many months before he could even possibly imagine that there would be enough coming in from real estate listings and sales commissions to make it worthwhile to risk giving up the stability and security of the sheriff's position. So he endured his inner distress, his fear of being discovered, his rage at the primitive ugliness of his colleagues, his own homophobia and hatred of those who were being arrested as best as he could. Sometimes it seemed more bearable because at last he might be on his way out. Slowly, the new career began to expand. Will's own wounds, ironically enough, proves to be an asset in facilitating the transition. Feeling he did that he was a loathsome creature whose very existence was an affront to the world had led him to create a very useful external persona. He tried to compensate for being a piece of excrement by being particularly kind and responsive to others, hoping that he could prove that it might not have been a mistake that he had been born. He was a hard worker. He was thorough and meticulous. He was honest and dependable. The members of the public who interacted with him about real estate matters came to value his way of being and of treating them very respectfully and responsibly. And his business grew. After about a year and a half of grinding away and seeking listings and seeking sales, two large escrows closed, giving him thousands of dollars in commissions, and he turned in his resignation at the sheriff's office at last. I had been keeping Will company for about 2 years by the time the transition was effected. I started wondering to myself whether or not he would find some other use for our sessions, or whether he would now get ready to say goodbye to me. But I did not wait long before he took the second of those forks in the road. Doc, thanks for what you've done and helped me to start a new life. But I have a new problem that I don't know how to handle. Do you have any suggestions? What's the problem? There's an escrow officer I know that I've called upon frequently. Her name's Margot. She's so sharp. She knows everything about buying and selling property and all the glitches and problems that can come up. If I'm having trouble getting financing for a customer, she knows a loan broker for me to call who will help me. If I need an inspection or some work done on a house, she refers me to contractors, plumbers, electricians, whatever needs. And she's a whiz at making sure escrows are done properly and go to closure without a hitch. There isn't a week that goes by where there isn't something cropping up that I need to drop by to talk to her about. And she's always so kind to me. She sounds like a gem. So what's the problem? I think she likes me. She started fishing around to see if I would spend some time with her away from work. 3 weeks ago, she told me that she had an extra ticket for a concert and asked if I'd go with her. Last week, she said some of the people she knew were putting together a bowling league and wondered if I'd be interested in joining. Both times I mumbled some excuse, but I don't think she's going to stop trying. Let me repeat. So, what is the problem? I can't get involved with her. She doesn't know about my sexual rituals. Who the hell would want to date some asshole that jacks off with a dildo in a closet? She deserves someone better. She's a fine and worthwhile woman. She should have a capable straight man who'd be a great lover and a wonderful companion for herself. Will, let me tell you something. One of the damn things that make me groan with dismay about what I'm hearing from one of my clients is whether that person takes a stance based on assumptions he or she is making about what would be good or bad for someone else. You're wiping Margot out. In your crappy nobility, you're taking away her ability to make a decision for herself about what to do or not do with you. You're just blocking her and making sure she won't be able to do much of anything with you. But I already know the where it would be going if I was even to begin spending some time with her outside of the office. No, you don't know where it would be going. You only know what you imagine would be the case. But beliefs are not the truth. They're only ideas. So let me ask you something. Would it be pleasant for you to have dinner with her, take a walk with her, or go to a movie together? She seems to think it would be pleasant for her. Well, if you put it that way, it probably would be enjoyable. But why are you nagging me about this? We could never be much of anything else with each other. Oh, for God's sakes, you don't have any friends. Yet the nourishment of somebody's companionship could do special things for you. And where have you been the last several years? Haven't you paid any attention to the fact that even openly gay men can often have deep and emotionally satisfying relationships with one or more women, even if they're not sexually involved with each other? For some, the absence of a sexual bond can sometimes produce even deeper social and emotional intimacy. So, what do you do? You like to eat. I've heard you many times being excited by your discovery of some eating spot along the South Coast where you live. For God's sakes, invite her to dine with you and enjoy the ocean, the food, and the conversation. It took me two more sessions to nudge Will successfully forward into seeing Margot socially. But at the end, he summoned up the courage, and a touching courtship commenced. Slowly, each began to share with other pain stories of complex and wounding childhoods, and to have intimate conversations about what was real, hurt, and what it was for which each longed until the dreaded and critical moment arrived. Margot had invited Will to dine with her at her little house, a cozy bungalow 2 blocks from the beach she had bought proudly with her own earnings and savings. As the evening wore on, she told Will she wanted him to stay on. She told him those words were hard for her to say to him. He had sometimes held her hand, he put his arm around her when walking, and at the moment when they walked in the dark. But he never made any greater attempt to become physical with her. She was so frightened that he had no attraction to her and that he was just being polite. But he probably found her homely and not at all to his liking. Bless Will, he made a frenetic gesture to jump off the cliff. No, it's not you at all. It's not you at all. You deserve someone better. I'm a virgin. I've never had any sex. I think I'm gay, but I don't have homosexual relationships either. I don't do anything with anyone. I just satisfy myself. You should stay away from me. I can't ever be a good companion for you or for anybody. Will pounding in terror. He waited some moments. Finally, Margot came out of her thoughtfulness and answered, we don't have to have sex. You're such a dear man. You're interesting, handsome, and extremely kind and capable. I want to find some way to have you in my life more. Would you just be willing to sleep in my bed tonight? I'd be happy if we only cuddled a bit. I'd sleep peacefully because I know you'd be with me all through the night. And so it started. The two spent increasing amounts of time together. They loved walking along the strand, listening to the ocean. They loved sampling all the ethnic cuisines available in metropolitan Los Angeles. They loved going to concerts. They loved groaning about the impossible clients both of them had to service. They loved grumbling about troublesome members of their respective families. They loved spending time with Margot's friends, who quickly became Will's friends as well. But most of all, they loved spooning in Margot's bed and having the best sleep they'd ever experienced. Of course, Margot had never been convinced that some kind of sexual dance with Will would be as totally as impossible as Will had insisted. So some nights she would kiss him softly. She would kiss him all over and touch him gently. Sometimes he would get erections, and she would give him oral sex or simply fondle him gently and delicately. On occasion, he would give in to growing excitement and allow himself to orgasm before the two fell into a sound sleep. After many months, Margot found the courage to ask Will what he had been imagining on those nights when she was attempting to pleasure him. Once again, Will restored my faith in the possibilities of true human courage and was willing to be real with her. My client described to the woman who was suffering a powerful and evocative masturbation dream. He himself giving oral sex to a young male who was hurting and troubled. And just as he had with me, when he had finished sharing his hated internal visions with Margot, Will broke out sobbing. Margot took him in her arms, rocked him, and quietly shushed him until both got sleepy and fell into a troubled sleep. Some days later, while watching the sunset on the beach near Margot's home, Will's dear partner wanted to talk. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me the other night. I love you. I never want you to be other than what you are. So I was thinking, I don't want you to have to go away from me when I'm inviting me to take pleasure together. Go away into some secret daydream away from me while you get excited and begin to spend some time with some imagined boy. Look at me. I'm petite. I have small breasts. I was quite a tomboy when I was growing up. Could you let me be the boy of your dreams? I'd be happy to pretend. I'm going to a sex shop tomorrow and to get myself a dildo so I can strap it on. Tomorrow night, would you be willing to enact that powerful daydream that excites you and yet has you fleeing from anybody real? Let me take up the role of the young boy in your erotic longing, and we can play act together. Thus, the two of them began a process of opening and making fluid the gender role assignments between the two. They experimented with the creation of a variety of role playing daydreams during their sexual encounters. They experimented with loving, erotic penetration of many body orifices, sometimes with dildo and sometimes with Will's penis. After a period of time, Will announced that he would be leaving me. He was now at peace in his life. He told me that he and Margot were going to lease out their respective homes as income property and were going to buy a house and live in it together. He thanked me for the help I had been to him. I thought our work was done, but it was not. 2 years later, the two asked for time with me as a couple. During the first session, seeing him again, there was sure some beginning catch up, as they did for me. Margot had opened her own escrow company, and Will was not only continuing his real estate career, but was doubly busy because he had taken up the responsibility to be Margot's business manager in addition. Both were making out very well in the rising real estate tide in Southern California. None of this was why they had come, of course. Margot was the one who informed me that they had started a set of discussions about the possibility of marrying and becoming parents. She was very committed to the project, but Will had serious reservations. When I inquired about what were the reservations, Will's self loathing surfaced again. He was very frightened that he had no role model about what a father might be. Uh, in addition, while he was no longer closeted with Margot, he felt he would have to be closeted with any child of his. What if some hypothetical offspring of his would stumble across the secrets of her parents' or his parents' sexuality? Will could not bear the daydream of that discovery and of the shock and disgust he would sure would eventuate. Well, I noticed that my time is up, so I'm going to stop this wonderful story close to the end, but not quite. And I will say again that I chose this with great joy today because it is a story about two individuals moving out of the confines and textures of the culture and daring to be brave and daring to experiment with what happens if we can accept one another in a deeper and richer way than we're currently doing, a way that's marked by hatred of the other group. So thank you for that. And I will pause and let my dear colleagues have a go at whatever they want to say about what I presented to them. Who's first?
I have a question for clarification, Arthur. When the men were arrested and humiliated at the station where Will was um, working, were they arrested for being gay at that
Yes.
time? They were.
Yes,
Okay.
they were being arrested for public vandalism.
Uh-huh.
They were gay in public places. They were soliciting gayness. They were soliciting homosexuality, or they were actually engaged in some homosexual act in a public place, in a public restroom, or in a park, or wherever.
I see. Okay.
Soliciting gay sex in public was a legal offense too. It was he went to jail for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, was there any history of abuse and in Will's childhood, his background?
I suspected some. He said there may have been. He was fuzzy about it. He said.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I even thought that his brother and he may have been engaged in sex play together when he was growing up. I never got a concrete answer to that question, but it was certainly a hypothesis I had.
It really is a lovely example of being really just open to meeting your client where they're at and not having an agenda as a therapist and just letting things kind of unfold.
Well, I did have agenda. I felt so terribly lonely when I connected with him. I wanted him to be able to be less lonely. And I did also not want him to have to go to a workplace where he felt tormented every day.
Yeah.
So I had a partial agenda. How to get there, what that consisted of, no, I had no agenda for it. I didn't want him to suffer. That was my agenda.
Well, I imagine that's a reasonable jumping off point.
Back in the days when you were treating Will, was there a concept of bisexuality?
No. There were certain people who were hermaphrodites. They had some of the genitalia of both genders, so they were recognized as a tiny but not unknown group. But people who were bisexual, the common take on that was that they were gay and just trying to hide it. They should embrace their identity fully and be punished for it if necessary.
I see. Okay.
Oh, there were lots of men, lots of male men who closeted and had created ordinary families and were having a lot of gay sex on the side. I don't think they considered themselves bisexual. I think they were just being true to their nature outside the marriage. And like Will, I'm sure the daydreams they were having while they had intercourse with their wives were daydreams of having a male partner that they were getting exciting themselves with. That to me is the test. What do people daydream about? True bisexuals have equal arousal or almost equal arousal daydreaming about somebody in the opposite gender or somebody in the in the same gender that they met or came in contact with, and it seemed exciting, and they're able to get equally aroused with a partner of either sex. The nature that that really exists, and it's not just dodging being homosexual, is a fairly new one.
Okay.
Remember, during this period of time, the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-4 still listed homosexuality as a mental disorder. And the stigma of having it was terrible. We have become more gracious and more accepting. At least the liberal faction of the current culture has become more accepting. And the younger people in the culture have become more accepting. But I have surprises in the ending of the story for you next week. And then I will take up step family creation after I do the story. Thank you
Okay,
for listening.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look
That,
forward to the completion.
that story is particularly precious to me. I think it represents for me an exemplar of what our profession needs to be. Without the client has to lead, and we need to follow.
Compassion.
Yeah, we need to follow with compassion and with helpfulness. All right, I'll be with you next week.
Okay.
Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
let us recover from the terrible hangover we're gonna have from the way this election unfolded and the limitations it's still gonna lock us up in.
The hangover may continue.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Peace, Cat.